story that must be told. Here's a little story that must be told. Here's a little story. Here's a little story.
My name is Barry Williams. I go by DJ B-Mello. Originally from Greenville, South Carolina. I claim Seattle as my home. I moved to Seattle when I was 21. I'm a mellow guy, B-Mello, you know. That's where my name came from. I've been DJing, 2024, so 41 years. I'm from South Carolina, then I moved to North Carolina, then I moved to Okinawa, Japan. So that a lot of my hip-hop exposure came from there, which is kind of crazy. You know, I was already into hip-hop, but not as much. And just meeting all these guys that were in the service, you know, they're military, in the military, but they're young. You know, they're like 18, 19. They're coming from New York, from all the different boroughs, and they're bringing, you know, tapes, and they're playing them at, you know, in the gym and just playing them out loud everywhere. I'm just like, what is this? My stepdad was in the Marines. So he got stationed in Okinawa. I'm basically a military dependent there, going to a Department of Defense dependent school. And the other thing is when I would go to Tokyo, they were so into hip-hop. That's where I learned a lot more, you know what I mean? Rapper's Delight is probably the first record that I memorized, you know. I heard it at like the basketball court on, you know, just like on boom boxes, and it was on the radio a little bit, but there wasn't too many records. At first, I like the beats and I like the rhymes, you know, like growing up, like I didn't know a lot about hip hop. So when I heard it, I was just like, man, I was just intrigued, like, what is this, you know? And like memorizing records, it's like, oh, I can do this too, you know? And that's me as like a 12-year-old thinking I could, you know, I can rap. One of my neighbors in North Carolina, their brother worked at a radio station, and I can't remember the format. I think it was rock or country or something, but they would get like rap records, you know. So, and he would give me all those, and I had, you know, I had a turntable or whatever. I didn't DJ at that point. So like anything that was like Sugar Hill or Enjoy, like I would get those. They used to have mix shows at night, and mix shows would test records, like new records that weren't in the rotation, or if there were hip hop mix shows, they would just be strictly hip hop. I used to listen to K-Fox, Nastiness on Sunday nights, and the signal would go out at sunset. It would drop because it was AM. It was like 1250 K-Fox, so I could catch like the first hour or so, and then it would just go out. Every week it's like new music, but you know, it's almost like you bought almost every record that came out back then. At least I did. You know, even as a kid, it's like I would try to save up money and just, you know, if a whole, you know, a new 12-inch came out, I would, if it was from a label that I knew, or if I heard it, I was getting it. A lot of like the early stuff that I just collected for fun, it's like a lot of my peers, they got into collecting 45s, and, you know, it's like a kind of novelty, you know, to have all these things, but I'm not really a collector. But like over my career, I've like gotten rid of records, you know, like had these massive collections and, you know, sold them, or, you know, it's kind of crazy, like, you know, thinking back. For me, I mean, as a kid, like I used to break. I was like a b-boy first, and I really was fascinated by DJs, you know, around probably 82, I would say. I was just like, I started seeing DJs, and I was like, man, I kind of started making tapes just for myself, you know, and my little crew to dance to or whatever. But it was kind of out of necessity. But then I knew that's what I wanted to do, you know. I knew I wanted to DJ, and I knew I wanted to be a radio DJ. I used to make mixtapes, and when I first came to Seattle, like, me and Supreme used to make these Point Blank mixtapes. We used to be in a crew called Point Blank, you know, like Point Blank Posse back then, but, you know, it's like 80s. The mixtapes got everywhere eventually, which is crazy. It's so amazing when someone contacts me from, especially like overseas, from like Belgium or Spain or France or Germany, and they're like, yeah, I got that tape. And I'm like, oh, show it to me. And I'm like, oh, that's not what it looked like. It looks like this. That's a bootleg, you know? But I'm so happy that it got over there. Or they're like, this is what it looks like. I'm like, oh wow, I did that. Like that's the original. I had my own distribution, and I had other regular distributors, I guess, But especially early on, it's funny because I took like ads out on the back of magazines that had my apartment number and like, the address. And I'm just like, man, this is so reckless. Like, I wasn't the first to do mixtapes out here. Like I had a Mix-a-Lot mixtape. I had Vitamix from Portland mixtape. I had some mixes from Nasty Ness, these are all from like the early 80s, like 84, 85, something like that, I think. Back then it was kind of like who had the hottest and the newest stuff first, or who had the most skills. Some people could care less of your mixing skills, and that's why some DJs that weren't so good at mixing became really popular mixtape DJs, But when you had some that knew how to mix, like myself, like Camilo, Tony Touch, I think there was a big appreciation for that, But to me, creativity is the key to good mixtapes. I used to be sponsored by Zoomies, and I was doing in-store mixtapes for them. So I was duplicating one for every store, and sending them, how many ever copies, 200 copies, and then they're sending one to each store in every mall or whatever. And then little did they know, it's like probably get played for like a few days and then somebody take it home. And they're really collectible right now, which is crazy. I've made so many different mixtapes, probably hundreds, I think, so it's crazy. I was DJing, and I started doing shows and clubs. I was doing the mixtapes, selling those. So I wanted to be at the club selling my mixtapes. So I'm at the clubs DJing, selling my mixtapes. Then all of a sudden I'm dealing with all the record labels, and they're like, hey, it was right when street teams were starting. So like I was like really early on street teams. So I was like on all the major label street teams. So I'm doing like everything at once. And then I'm like, well, I want to be on the radio. So I'm doing college radio. And then I'm doing like, at one point I'm doing like 3 college radio stations, and I'm writing for like 3 magazines, and I'm just doing all these things, just trying to make ends meet and do only hip hop and not have to work a 9 to 5. That was my main thing. And I think the mixtape hustle was something where I could actually do that. It was good because I could push myself with all these other names, at the time that were coming up, and oh, you like this? Well, check this one out, and it's like, who's going to push you more than yourself? It was new. It was all new, especially hip-hop wise. So it's like everybody's trying to network. And, well, who are you? What do you do? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm B-Mello. I'm from Seattle. They're like, Seattle? Back then it's like nobody was checking for Seattle. I don't know if you know, but I used to write for The Flavor, and I got interviewed by them. I had a group at the time, Jay the Law and B-Mello. Like, we got interviewed, and then I started doing, like, reviews for them. Then I started interviewing artists, and then they gave me a section. I had a mixtape section. I had, like, I think it was called a Buzz section, where I would put, like, 5 of the newest underground records that I thought were dope or whatever. And back then, when I would write about something, I didn't really... like say I would review or I would mention a 12-inch or whatever, then like I would get these faxes from Japan, and they're like, we need 500 copies of this, and I'm thinking like, oh, it's not even out, I'm like, oh, how can I, and that was like another outlet to try to make money, especially early on. Like, I remember we had a hip-hop night with The Flavor. It was on Tuesdays. It was me and B-Max, and I remember like the day I got like Deep Cover, Dre and Snoop, and the day I got Come Clean. This is like 92, 91, or 92, 93, whatever. But it was the height of the grunge scene, and I didn't know any of the grunge guys, but they would come through. They were like just being, pushed to the world, but then they're just coming through this hip-hop night on a Tuesday, and they'd be like, yo, that's so-and-so from Pearl Jam. I was like, it is? Okay, cool. I started off doing mixtapes, and when I started off on radio, I did like underground radio, like college radio, and I didn't really want to go on commercial radio, which I ended up having to basically. It's not like you're selling out totally, but you don't feel a lot of the music sometimes. I like exposing people to music. I like sharing music. I think music's like the best thing, to me. I mean, especially hip hop. When I'm driving, I'm just like, play 90s hip hop. you know. I started like doing guest spots on KAOS. It was in Olympia, and me and Supreme, we used to drive out there. I remember we took Soul, rest in peace, my homeboy Soul, one time, and he wasn't even a DJ then, which is crazy because he became like a really good DJ, you know. But she had a college show out there, and we would take the turntables and the mixer and all the records and go out there and, you know, do it live. And they didn't really mix live in Seattle yet. Well, you make mistakes sometimes. Not me, but no, I'm just kidding. The story with KCMU is like, okay, so to bring it back to that, so me and Supreme, we were making mixtapes, and then he would like pull up to the barbershops and run in and sell them and come back out, and, you know, and then when I started doing them on my own, I started selling them in different stores, and there was a guy named Mike Clark. He worked at Beverly's, and he had my mixtape, and Ness was starting a mix show on KUBE called Hot Mix, and it was on Saturday night, and I think it was 1992, and he had given Ness my mixtape, and Ness was like, oh, okay, let's bring him on KCMU to do, because Ness used to do a 30-minute master mix every Sunday or every other Sunday, and he would do a local music spotlight every other Sunday. This is on KCMU, and so basically, when he started doing KUBE, he wasn't going to have time to record his KCMU, so he brought me on to that. So that's how I got on KCMU. Off and on, like, I was on KCMU, and at the time it turned to KEXP, I was like the co-host for Cutfather. It's had like a lot of changes and stuff. I think Street Sounds started with Supreme and Cutfather. He named it that. That makes sense. And then Cut inherited it from him. So I was like Cut's co-host, and I also mixed on there. And then when Cut left, I became the host. So I think I was a host from like 2000 to 2009, and then on KEXP. And then Larry Mizell came on, and I actually was on KUBE and KEXP at the same time. There's a lot to do, you know, commit to a radio show every Sunday, especially when you DJ like Friday and Saturday nights, and a lot of times you're out of town Saturday, so to make it back and make it to the show. My first big show was the HBO one at the Paramount, and that was sold out, and it was like, man, you know, Bernie Mac was the host, Bill Bellamy, Adele Givens, Reggie McFadden, but Supreme Danny was in the front row, and he had a red bandana on, and he was in all like red, like, and I remember they were just ranking on him. When I started promoting shows, I tried to make sure I had an opening group and a DJ that were getting paid, you know, which was not a thing back then, because it was always that same story of, oh yeah, there's no real budget for the DJ, you know, the headliner's getting $15,000, you know, the opener's not getting paid, we got to pay for security, we got to pay for the venue. We're like, hey, I'm DJing the whole night, you know. I used to DJ in the Zone, and it was like a pre-party in the back of Husky Stadium. It's like a practice field, and it was basically like a big beer garden. But I used to do a lot of stuff for the Mariners, and I did some events for the Storm, Seahawks. I did some of the training camps, stuff like that. I've been seeing a lot of DJs DJing for the Kraken, you know, and I just think it's dope. Hip-hop is so infused in everything now. It's like it's came so far. It's just crazy, you know. The West Coast DJ of the Year covered like California, Oregon, Utah. I'm trying to think, Hawaii, Alaska. Like, it's a lot of states. So to get that, to me, was a big deal, you know, especially being from the Northwest, being from Seattle. I was surprised, you know. I was really surprised that I won. Another thing is like the DMCs. I was in the DMCs. I think I was the first one to compete. What does it stand for? I think it stands for like Disco Mixing Club. You know, it's like the biggest DJ battle. I was just a finalist in the DMCs, but I went to San Francisco. This was in '94. The people I battled back then, a lot of them were like Scratch Pickles and Beat Junkies, and they're like, you know, some of the bigger turntablists, and they were so advanced. I had been battling since like '85, but it's like my style was more kind of old school and beat juggling, and like I would say more East Coast, and they were more scratching. Yeah, I mean, I used to do like lecture demos at University of Washington on DJing and techniques, and you know, and I'm thinking like, wow, looking back at that, you know, 30 years later, it's like, wow, that's crazy. You know, my whole story is like I'm a street DJ. Like I was like a bedroom DJ. I honed my skills. Then I was a street DJ, and I made mixtapes. I did clubs. But the core DJs was like it was like a new movement. A guy named Tony Neal, and he was coming out of Milwaukee. So he wasn't like all these other DJs from these, you know, L.A. or New York. He was coming from like a smaller market mentality, but a bigger dream, I think. Started conventions like these core DJ conventions, and we had, you know, a core DJ show on Shade 45. I was doing the Shade 45 Shadyville radio, and I was doing jamming. I think I was doing a 5 o'clock mix on jamming in Portland, and I was doing KUBE, and I was doing KEXP. So I was doing like all these radio, and I won that West Coast DJ of the Year thing, and it's like Shadyville, like they flew me out to the Dominican Republic, you know, like they took care of me. But the core DJs, they allowed me to still stay in the core DJs even though I was a Shadyville DJ. I was trying to rep them both as long as I could without, you know. Luckily, Tony Neal, he never made me choose. It gave me a lot of opportunities, I think, you know, and helped network, you know. I had one show with Leaders of the New School. It was like a flavor show at Rock Candy, and I quit my job after that. I'm like, I made it, you know. I'm thinking like, I didn't think about it, you know, the fact that that job was stable income or whatever. And so at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I have to hustle. Just seen a flyer that I was on. It was called Ravioli, and it was a rave, and it was at King Cat Theater, and it had Donald Glad and Kamikaze and me. I can't remember the other DJs, but just remembering how people dressed back then. But I just had those big, like, I don't know, you could like hide some people in your. I know I just was getting rid of some clothes, and I was like, man, did I really wear 3X, or was I wearing them baggy, or, you know, and then looking at some of the jerseys, I was like, man, they were huge. They were so long. It was like, it looked like I had a dress shirt on, you know, really a dress shirt, like a dress. I remember I was DJing a 50 Cent show at it was at the Paramount too, I think, but I had a jersey on. It was really long, about to my, you know, almost to my knees. And then the road manager for 50 Cent walked in, and he had a Sonics jersey, and it was to his ankles. And this is like 2003. It's the height of, like, you know, your hat is size 10, and, you know, your jersey is. I did wear some big ass shirts though, man. It's embarrassing.